Hello, incredible viewers. I'm so excited you're here because today's story is one you won't want to miss. You have a great eye for powerful, gripping stories, and this one is filled with betrayal, strategy, and the ultimate triumph. Meet Charlotte Hayes, a brilliant entrepreneur who built a fashion empire, only to have her ruthless mother-in-law, Vivian Kensington, try to tear it all down. But Charlotte is no victim. With intelligence and patience, she turns the tables in the most spectacular way. Get ready for a thrilling ride, because this is a story of revenge, resilience, and unexpected alliances. Charlotte Hayes leaned back in her sleek office chair, staring at yet another email marked urgent. The subject line, contract termination, was all too familiar by now. In the past 5 days, 6 of her top clients had pulled out of upcoming collaborations, each citing concerns about financial stability and long-term reliability. It didn't take a genius to see that something was wrong. Her luxury fashion brand, Hayes Atelier, was thriving just weeks ago, flourishing with high-profile endorsements and elite clientele. Now, it was as if someone had flipped a switch, turning her empire into a house of cards. Charlotte inhaled deeply, forcing herself to stay composed. This wasn't just bad luck, this was orchestrated. And she had a good idea who was behind it. Another one? Lena Alvarez, her business partner and closest friend, stood by the doorway, her arms crossed tightly. Charlotte sighed, turning her laptop screen toward Lena. That's the 7th in less than a week. Kensington's been busy. Lena's expression hardened. Vivian? She didn't need to clarify. They both knew Vivian Kensington, Charlotte's mother-in-law and former fashion mogul, had been circling like a vulture ever since Nicholas's death 8 months ago. I knew she'd come after you. But this? She's trying to destroy everything you built. Charlotte clicked through the emails, each one more infuriating than the last. She's leveraging her connections, feeding these clients lies, making them doubt us. She clenched her jaw. Vivian's trying to erase me. Lena, as if I was just a footnote in Nicholas's life. As if I didn't build this company from the ground up. Lena scoffed. She's always underestimated you, but this is a new level of ruthless. A bitter smile played on Charlotte's lips. She wants a war? She murmured. Fine, let's give her one. She turned back to her desk, unlocking a sleek drawer and pulling out a thick manila envelope. Inside was the ace she'd been holding onto for months, the one thing Vivian never saw coming. I take it we're not going to let her get away with this? Lena asked, a knowing gleam in her eyes. Charlotte smirked, tapping the envelope against her palm. Not a chance. Charlotte had never been good enough for the Kensington name, not in Vivian's eyes. From the moment she and Nicholas announced their engagement, Vivian Kensington made her disapproval clear. It didn't matter that Charlotte was a self-made woman, that she had built Hayes Atelier from scratch without a penny of Kensington wealth. To Vivian, she was an outsider, an ambitious nobody trying to claw her way into high society through marriage. The fact that Charlotte and Nicholas had been deeply in love? Irrelevant. The fact that Charlotte had signed an ironclad prenup, refusing a dime of family money? Ignored. In Vivian's world, pedigree was everything, and Charlotte would always be a woman from nowhere. The tension only deepened after Nicholas's tragic death 8 months ago. At his funeral, while Charlotte was still drowning in grief, Vivian had slid an envelope across the table, a check for $500,000. A parting gift, she had called it, a bribe. All Charlotte had to do was take the money, disappear, and start fresh somewhere far from the Kensington name. Charlotte had ripped the check in half. That was the moment their silent battle turned into all-out war. Vivian had never forgiven her for staying in New York, for refusing to fade into the background like a disposable accessory. Instead, Charlotte had thrown herself into her business, turning Hayes Atelier into a powerhouse brand. Her designs worn by Hollywood's elite and New York's wealthiest women. And for a while, Vivian had simply watched from the shadows, waiting for Charlotte to fail on her own. But when that failure never came, when Charlotte thrived despite the odds, Vivian had made her move. And now, she was strangling Charlotte's business from the inside out, using her powerful industry connections to blacklist her, whispering just enough poison into the right ears to make clients second-guess their contracts. Charlotte knew exactly what this was. Vivian wasn't just trying to ruin her, she was trying to erase her. But if Vivian thought Charlotte was going to crumble, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. Vivian Kensington had spent decades building her legacy, priding herself on power, influence, and control. But what she didn't know, what no one knew, was that the very foundation of her power no longer belonged to her. Charlotte had made sure of that 6 months ago. It had started with a whisper. A tip from a well-connected banker who had once been a loyal client of Hayes Atelier. Over an off-the-record conversation, Charlotte had learned the truth. Vivian's late husband had secretly mortgaged the Kensington estate. The grand, historic mansion that had been in the family for generations, the one Vivian clung to as proof of her status, was nothing more than collateral for Arthur Kensington's reckless financial missteps. His bad investments, his spiraling debts, he had gambled it all away behind Vivian's back. And when the bank finally put the estate up for auction, Charlotte had been waiting. She hadn't bid under her own name, of course. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she had created a shell company, a nameless entity with no ties to Hayes Atelier or the Kensington family. Through carefully orchestrated moves, she had outmaneuvered every other bidder, securing the estate right under Vivian's nose. The paperwork had been signed, the deal finalized, and just like that, Charlotte owned the Kensington mansion. The best part? Vivian had no idea. For months, she had continued living in that house, completely unaware that the very floors she walked on, the chandeliers she polished, the walls that held generations of Kensington history, all belonged to Charlotte. Technically, Vivian was a tenant, unknowingly paying rent to the investment firm Charlotte had set up. And now, as Vivian waged war against her, sabotaging her business, trying to erase her existence, Charlotte finally had the perfect reason to strike back. She pulled open her desk drawer and retrieved the thick manila envelope she had been holding onto for months. Inside was an official eviction notice, signed and ready to be served. Charlotte smirked, tapping the envelope against her palm. Vivian Kensington wanted to destroy her? It was time for Charlotte to return the favor. Charlotte barely had time to sip her morning espresso before her phone erupted in a series of sharp, insistent vibrations. She glanced at the screen. Vivian Kensington, right on cue. Smirking, she let it ring twice before answering. "Vivian," she said, her voice smooth, composed. "You conniving little fraud." Vivian's voice crackled with rage, the carefully curated elegance of her usual tone now stripped bare. "How dare you?" Charlotte swirled her coffee lazily, pretending to consider. "Dare to do what exactly?" "Don't play games with me," Vivian snapped. "I just received an eviction notice. For my own house. What kind of delusional stunt is this?" Charlotte leaned back in her chair, letting the moment stretch just long enough for Vivian's fury to simmer. "Not a stunt," she said finally. "A business transaction. You see, 6 months ago, the Kensington estate went up for auction. And while you were too busy pretending your family was still at the top, I bought it, legally, quietly, and now, it's mine." The silence on the other end was electric, thick with disbelief. "You're lying," Vivian whispered, but there was an unmistakable tremor in her voice. Charlotte smiled. "Check the paperwork. You've been living in my house, Vivian, and now, you have 30 days to vacate the premises." A sharp inhale. "Then, you think you've won?" Vivian's voice dropped into a deadly hush. "You have no idea who you're up against. I have connections, people who could destroy your pathetic little business with a single phone call." Charlotte didn't flinch. "Oh, I know exactly who I'm up against," she said, her voice cool. "A woman who's spent her life controlling others, who can't stand that the world is moving on without her. But you miscalculated, Vivian, because I don't scare easily." Another beat of silence. Then the unmistakable sound of something shattering on Vivian's end of the call, glass against marble. Perhaps a crystal vase meeting its end. "You'll regret this," Vivian hissed. Charlotte's smirk deepened. "I already don't." Then, before Vivian could spew another threat, she ended the call. The war had officially begun. Charlotte barely had time to set her phone down before the aftershock of the eviction notice hit like a tidal wave. The first sign of Vivian's retaliation came within the hour. Several of Charlotte's high-profile clients suddenly cancelled their upcoming collaborations, citing concerns about company restructuring. A coincidence? Not a chance. Charlotte knew exactly what was happening. Vivian was using every connection she had left to squeeze her out of the industry. Then came the calls, whispers from designers, boutique owners, and PR firms, all echoing the same manufactured doubts. Some apologized in hushed voices, confessing that they had been pressured into severing ties. Others, those still loyal to the Kensington name, weren't as discreet. One particularly bold fashion executive even sneered over the phone. Vivian Kensington built this industry. Charlotte, you really think you can survive without her goodwill? Charlotte merely smiled. Vivian was playing the only game she knew, cutthroat reputation warfare. What she didn't realize, however, was that Charlotte had been anticipating this move for months. And she had already positioned her next piece on the board. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she had saved for just this moment. Julian Marks. The voice on the other end answered, crisp and professional. Julian, it's Charlotte Hayes, she said smoothly. I think I'm finally ready to talk. There was a pause, then the unmistakable excitement of a journalist who had just struck gold. About? The Kensington estate, the real story, the gambling debts, the secret mortgage, how Vivian has been illegally strong-arming clients to destroy my business. She let the words hang in the air. And I have proof. Another pause, longer this time. Then Julian exhaled sharply. Charlotte, this is going to be a bombshell. I know, she said simply. Less than 24 hours later, the story exploded across major business and fashion news outlets. Headlines painted a damning picture. Vivian Kensington's empire was built on lies, and now it's crumbling. Every sordid detail was exposed: Arthur Kensington's reckless debts, the secret sale of the mansion, and most importantly, Vivian's campaign to sabotage Charlotte's company. The fallout was immediate. Fashion insiders distanced themselves from Vivian. Investors, once loyal, began pulling back. Vivian Kensington, once untouchable, was now the center of a public scandal. Charlotte watched the chaos unfold, her lips curving into a knowing smile. Vivian thought she could destroy her. Instead, Charlotte had just burned the Kensington legacy to the ground. The Kensington estate loomed before Charlotte like a relic of a fading empire, grand, imposing, yet hollow beneath its polished veneer. This was no longer Vivian's kingdom. It was hers. She stepped out of her sleek black sedan, heels clicking against the cobblestone driveway, and strode toward the front steps where Vivian was waiting. The older woman stood rigid, her usual air of effortless poise betrayed by the tension in her shoulders. Gone was the untouchable fashion mogul. In her place stood a woman fighting to hold onto the last remnants of her power. Charlotte didn't bother with pleasantries. You wanted to see me? She said smoothly, her voice laced with controlled amusement. Vivian inhaled sharply, her nails digging into her palms. You had no right, she said, voice low and dangerous. This house has been in the Kensington family for generations. Charlotte crossed her arms. And yet, you were the one who lost it. She countered. I didn't take it from you. Vivian, your husband gambled it away. I simply outplayed you. Vivian flinched, just barely, but enough for Charlotte to catch it. Good. For the first time, the indestructible Vivian Kensington looked shaken. Why are you here, Vivian? Charlotte asked. Are we negotiating? Or are you just wasting my time? Vivian's jaw tightened. She wasn't used to being the one at a disadvantage. Finally, she exhaled and met Charlotte's gaze. Her eyes colder now. What do you want? Charlotte pulled a folded document from her handbag and placed it in Vivian's trembling hands. A deal, she said. You stay in the house, as a tenant. But in return, you do exactly what I say. First, you publicly clear my name and retract every lie you've spread about my company. Second, you stop your games, no more sabotage. No more manipulation. Vivian's lip curled. And if I refuse? Charlotte smiled. Slow, sharp, deadly. Then the eviction stands. And your dirty laundry stays front-page news. Your choice. For the first time, Vivian Kensington had no move left to play. She looked at Charlotte, really looked at her. And for the first time in their years of battle, she finally saw the woman she had underestimated all along. After a long, tense silence, Vivian Kensington nodded. Vivian Kensington had never been one to back down. But as she stood in the grand foyer of what was no longer her house, the weight of reality settled on her. She had lost the estate, lost control of the industry she once dominated. And now, the woman she had spent years trying to destroy was the only person offering her a lifeline. She slowly folded the contract Charlotte had handed her, running a manicured finger along its edges. "You think this makes you the winner?" Vivian asked, her voice quieter now, more measured. Charlotte smirked. "I don't think, Vivian. I know." Vivian let out a dry laugh, short, bitter, but not entirely without admiration. "You really are relentless. I learned from the best," Charlotte replied smoothly. For a long moment, they stood there, two women who had been enemies, adversaries, two forces colliding again and again. But now, there was something different in Vivian's expression. Something that looked almost like respect. "I underestimated you," Vivian admitted at last, shaking her head. "You're stronger than I gave you credit for." Charlotte didn't let the words affect her. But deep down, she recognized the significance. Vivian Kensington did not give compliments. Not unless they were earned. Vivian exhaled, her posture relaxing ever so slightly. "You have your deal. I'll make the calls. I'll clean up your reputation. But don't think for a second that I've changed." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "I wouldn't expect you to." Vivian turned toward the grand staircase, pausing just before she ascended. "One more thing," she said, glancing back over her shoulder. "You remind me of myself. When I was your age." Charlotte smirked. "And here I thought that was your worst nightmare." Vivian chuckled softly, the sound foreign yet oddly fitting. "Perhaps." As she disappeared up the stairs, Charlotte stood there, realizing that something had shifted between them. They were still adversaries, still two women who would never truly trust one another, but now there was an understanding. Maybe, just maybe, the war was finally over. 3 months later, Hayes Atelier was stronger than ever. With Vivian's forced retraction and public endorsement, Charlotte's business had not only recovered, it had expanded. Former clients returned, new ones signed on, and her name, once whispered in doubt, was now spoken with admiration. But perhaps the most unexpected development was her new headquarters. Charlotte stepped into the east wing of the Kensington estate, now transformed into a sleek, modern workspace. The irony was not lost on her. The very house Vivian once used as a symbol of power was now fueling her success. Her team moved in weeks ago, and with every meeting, every design finalized under this roof, Charlotte cemented her place as an unstoppable force. She didn't expect Vivian's involvement. But when an invitation to the industry's most exclusive fashion gala arrived, it was Vivian who pulled the strings to secure her a prime spot. "Consider it an investment," she had said, waving off Charlotte's skepticism. For the first time, Charlotte saw a different version of Vivian, not just the ruthless matriarch, but a woman who respected power, even if it wasn't her own. Later that evening, as Charlotte reviewed new collections in her office, a small envelope was delivered. Inside was a single brass key and a note. "If you're going to build an empire here, you might as well have access to the whole house." Charlotte smiled. She had won, but more importantly, she had made the Kensington legacy her own. The sun had just begun to set, casting a golden glow over the Kensington estate's garden. Charlotte sat across from Vivian on the stone terrace. The tension that had once defined their every interaction now replaced with something different. Not friendship, not quite trust, but an understanding. "You've done well," Vivian said, stirring her tea with deliberate ease. "Better than I expected." Charlotte smirked. "High praise. Coming from you." Vivian exhaled, studying the woman she had once sworn to destroy. "Nicholas saw something in you," she admitted. "I refused to, but you've proven me wrong." Charlotte met her gaze. There was no gloating, no satisfaction in hearing those words, just a quiet acknowledgement of the long, brutal battle they had fought, and the unexpected truce they had reached. Vivian set her cup down, a rare glint of amusement in her sharp eyes. "Sunday dinners," she said. "If you're going to run your business out of my house, the least you can do is keep me entertained once a week." Charlotte chuckled, shaking her head. "I'll think about it." As she stood to leave, she glanced back at Vivian. "You're not as terrifying as you think you are." Vivian smirked. "And you're far more dangerous than I ever realized." The story of Charlotte and Vivian teaches a powerful lesson about resilience, strategy, and the true nature of power. Charlotte didn't win by fighting fire with fire, she won by outthinking, outmaneuvering, and standing her ground. She proved that success isn't about titles or legacy but about vision, determination, and knowing when to turn enemies into allies. Vivian, once her greatest adversary, learned that underestimating the wrong person can be a fatal mistake. In the end, the greatest victories aren't just about defeating opponents, they're about building something so strong that even those who opposed you must respect it.